Welcome back. Let's get started on Nahum chapter 3, beginning with the first verse. Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and plunder, no end to their prey. The crack of the whip and the rumble of the wheel, galloping horse and bounding chariot, horsemen charging, flashing sword and glinting spear, host of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end. They stumble over the bodies. Almost a flashback to the previous chapter, using those short little phrases, and even in the English it shows it, but in the Hebrew they're even shorter, more terse. Kind of like when you watch a movie or a TV show and they show a series of quick flashes of images going. That's almost what you get as we read through this. First of all, the city and the destruction that is happening. The last part there, host of slain, heaps of corpse, dead bodies without end. They stumble over the bodies, showing the destruction and the disaster that will come upon Nineveh in the time to come. Verse 4, and all for the countless whoring of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betray nations with her whorings and people with her charms. The city that is opposed to God is often called a prostitute, to reflect its unfaithfulness to God, opposition to God, and to God's chosen people. So the God that this king has, that the people of Nineveh have, is power and strength, destroying other nations for their own benefit. Let's continue. Verse 5. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will lift up your skirt over your face, and I will make nations look at your nakedness and kingdoms at your shame. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. And all who look at you will shrink from you and say, wasted is Nineveh. Who will grieve for her? Where shall I seek comforters for you? The first verse, verse 5 and actually 6, both focus on the shaming of Assyria. Not only will Nineveh be destroyed, but the people of Assyria will be put to shame. The idea of lifting skirts over the faces is to show that shame to the nations. Throwing filth, dung at them is treating them with contempt. Verse 8. Are you better than Thebes, that sat by the Nile, with water around her, her rampart a sea, and water her wall? Cush was her strength, Egypt too, and that without limit. Put and the Libyans were her helpers. Yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Her infants were dashed to pieces. At the head of every street for her honored men, lots were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. Thebes was the capital of Egypt. It was on the delta of the Nile, very well forded with a lot of natural protections, including the delta of the Nile itself, the sea on one side, great stone barriers. A lot was there to protect them. Yet they were taken by the Assyrians, destroyed by the Assyrians in 663 BC, about 40 years before the Assyrians were destroyed. In the next verse 9, it says, Cush was her strength, Egypt too, and that without limit. Put and the Libyans were her helpers. She had allies who went and defended her and helped her. And by the way, the Assyrians only ruled over Thebes about a year before they needed to go use their strength other places. Egypt had allies, unlike Assyria, who had no exiles. And yet it says, verse 10, Thebes went into exile. Even though she was well protected, had these allies, she went into captivity. Infants were dashed in pieces at the head of every street. That is one of the signs of the ruthlessness of the Assyrians. In Kings, it talks about how women had with babies, had their wombs ripped open so that the woman and the baby would both die. Even the honored men were treated as the least, as slaves taken off into captivity. So if Thebes can fall, that great city, how about Nineveh? Nineveh would fall as well. That is what the Lord is saying in this passage. Verse 11, you also will be drunken, and you will go into hiding. You will seek a refuge from the enemies. All your fortresses are like fig trees with first ripe figs. If shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. Behold, your troops are women in your midst. The gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. Fire has devoured your bars. Nothing will stop the invaders. What has happened to Thebes will happen to Assyria. God has spoken, and nothing will stop the invaders. As I wrap up, I'm going to focus on a little phrase that he uses in verse 8. He says, are you better than Thebes? My question is this: are you better than others? Often our pride leads us to think so. But when we compare ourselves to others, we are showing our pride. Notice we compare ourselves often to those who we know that we will show up better against. God calls us to compare ourselves to his holiness. And when we see we fail, he points us then to Christ and the hope that we have in him forever. Are you better than others? Only through the strength of Christ, but not on my own. Go in peace. We'll wrap up this great book tomorrow.